This Freedom Stories discussion is being recorded for use by the International Storytelling Center, ISC. This recording will be owned and managed by ISC and will be used for any educational purpose that ISC deems appropriate. By participating in this public discussion, you acknowledge this recording and its subsequent uses. Closed captioning is provided today by AI Media. Freedom Stories, Unearthing the Black Heritage of Appalachia, is proudly supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities and produced by the International Storytelling Center. All video footage from today's event is courtesy of East Tennessee PBS's Black in Appalachia.
Tennessee,
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 Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Lord, I've really been real stressed, down and out, losing ground. Although I am black and brown, problems got me pessimistic. Brothers and sisters keep messing up. Why does it have to be so damn tough? I don't know where I can go to let these ghosts out of my skull. My grandma passed, my brother's gone. I never at once felt so alone. I know you're supposed to be my steering wheel, not just my spare tire. But Lord, I ask you to be my guiding force and truth. For some strange reason it had to be. He guided me to Tennessee. Take me to another place. Take me to another land. Make me forget all the hurts me. Let me understand your plans. Take me to another place. Take me to another land. Make me forget all the hurts me. Let me understand your plans. Lord, it's obvious we got a relationship, talking to each other every night and day. Although you're superior over me, we talk to each other in a friendship way. Then out of nowhere, you tell me to break out of the country and into more countries, past Osborne, into Richmond, where the ghost of childhood haunts me. Walk the roads my forefathers walked, climb the trees my forefathers hung from. Ask those trees for all their wisdom. They tell me my ears are so young. Go back to whence you came, my family tree, my family name. For some strange reason it had to be. He guided me to Tennessee. Take me to another place. Take me to another land. Make me forget all the hurts me. Let me understand your plans. Take me to another place. Take me to another land. Make me forget all the hurts me. Let me understand your plans.
She went down to Holly Springs. Razadon and Baba, they went down to Peachtree. Headliner, I challenge you to a game of horseshoes. A game of horseshoes.
Now I see the importance of history. While my people be in the mess that they be. Many journeys to freedom made in vain by brothers on the corner playing ghetto games. I ask you, Lord, why you enlighten me without the enlightenment of all my folks. Instead, cause I set myself on a quest for truth, and he was there to quench my thirst. But I am still thirsty. Lord, allow me to drink some more. He said what I am searching for are the answers to all which are in front of me. The ultimate truth started to get blurry. For some strange reason it had to be. It was all a dream about Tennessee. Take me to another place. Take me to another land. Make me forget all the hurts me. Let me understand your plan. Take me to another place. Take me to another land. Make me forget all the hurts me. Let me understand your plan.
Oh, won't you let me? Won't you help me? Won't you help me understand your
Good afternoon. I am Alistine Turley, Director of the International Storytelling Center Freedom Stories Project. Welcome to our second virtual Freedom Stories public discussion. Freedom Stories is an international storytelling center initiative that illuminates an underappreciated, ignored, or neglected aspects of African American Appalachian history. The Freedom Stories program brings together the folk art of storytelling with humanities scholars to guide the public through a deeper appreciation of the role of African American stories in the American lexicon of struggles for freedom, equality, and social justice. This project is designed to trace the history of African Americans in Appalachia over time, showing how the past has shaped and informed the world we know today. While conceived as a regional program, based in Central Appalachia, the project's multimedia toolkit will serve as a resource for the nation and the world. We're eager to highlight the diversity of our Appalachian communities, the complexities of Appalachian histories, and the role the region has played in U.S. history, all of which has been subject to misunderstanding and stereotypes. The International Storytelling Center is fortunate to be able to conduct this important work and present these public discussions through a generous support of the National Endowment for the Humanities as the major funder of the Freedom Stories Project. During our second discussion, the history of a central Appalachian tradition known primarily as Emancipation Saturday will be explored with an eye toward providing greater depth into the history of the tradition and to gain a better understanding of how far the tradition has spread within and outside the region. We will also have a review of the many people and locations that continue to celebrate the event. This discussion is particularly timely in view of the national discussion now underway to make Texas Juneteenth celebration a national holiday. Today's discussion is recorded and will be made available on YouTube, the International Story Center webpage and Facebook page as part of our Freedom Stories Toolkit for public use and reference for those unable to view today's broadcast. I would encourage our viewing audience, if you have questions for our panelists, to please add them to our Facebook page, and that we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can as time permits. If you wish to follow remaining Freedom Stories discussions from the future, please check the International Storytelling Center webpage, which will have the latest updates and program details. On Saturday, August 8th, 1863, the military governor of Tennessee, Andrew Johnson, who was appointed by President Abraham Lincoln, freed his personal slaves in Greenville, Tennessee, thus beginning a 157-year tradition of celebrating the second Saturday in August as Emancipation Saturday in Central Appalachia. Today, I'm joined in discussion of this event with three community scholars, documentarians, and activists who have been engaged in documenting and promoting celebration of this event in the region. So I'm happy to welcome to the discussion this afternoon, Dr. Cicero M. Fain III, who is himself a third-generation Black Huntingtonian and professor of history at the College of Southern Maryland. Dr. Fain is a recipient of the Carter G. Woodson Fellowship from Marshall University and the author of several articles and publications. His first book, Black Huntingtonians and Appalachian History, was first published May of 2019 by the University of Illinois Press. So welcome and thank you, Dr. Fain, for joining us this afternoon. Our second panelist is Jasmine Henderson, who serves as a board member and recording secretary for Umoja Unity Committee, a nonprofit organization focused on bridging diverse cultures through education and artistic presentations in East Tennessee. As a board member, Henderson has produced events and campaigns dedicated to celebrating diversity through education and artistic performance, as well as community organizing. As a spoken word artist, she has helped produce events and campaigns throughout the region dedicated to celebrating diversity in Appalachia and outside the region, including raising money for the Water for Flint project, as well as work with the NAACP. Most recently, she has been partnered with the 400 Years of African American History Commission to develop a series entitled An Evening with Our Elders. Welcome, Jasmine. Thank you for joining us. And finally, we have with us a person who has made much of what you'll see today possible, and that is William Eisen II, who is a sixth-generation East Tennessean and Director of Community Outreach at East Tennessee Public Broadcasting Service in Knoxville. Mr. Easom is Director of the Black in Appalachia Project for PBS. He coordinates the project's research, community database development, documentary film and photography production, oral history collection, and educational events where he participates actively with members of the local community to produce what you'll see some of this afternoon. And I would certainly encourage after this event to visit that website. So this month as our storyteller, we are actually using Mr. Eason's work that he's going to share. So we're going to begin our discussion by first hearing from Mr. Ned Arter, the great-great-grandson of Samuel Johnson, the acknowledged founder of Emancipation Saturday. We'll then come back on the other side of the video clip and discuss this presentation with panelists. Thank you. So we'll hear from Mr. Arter.
My name is Ned Arter. Samuel Johnson was my great-great-grandfather. And he was my father's grandmother's dad. And Samuel started the 8th of August once he got freed. Well, as far as I know, before Andrew Johnson bought him, he was a slave on the Forby plantation in Cocke County. Andrew Johnson bought his sister and then went back the next day at her suggestion and bought him. And he owned them, and they lived in Greenville until, they were freed. He continued to live in Greenville and raised, his kids and so forth until he died, there. Well, after William was freed from slavery, eventually he moved to Knoxville and became a chef at one of the restaurants here. And during that time, when the TVA Dam was first built and Franklin Roosevelt was here, William wanted to meet him, and that didn't work out. And the famous news reporter Ernie Powell was eating one day in the restaurant where Samuel worked, where William worked. And somehow it was brought to his attention that William had wanted to meet the president. And so Ernie Powell decided to interview him and ended up writing a story about, William and so forth. And he was, syndicated like, Walter Winchell or somebody, big. And of course, it wasn't in television back then, so he had to read the newspaper. But anyway, Eleanor Roosevelt read the article and then showed it to her husband, Franklin Roosevelt. And I don't know if the Secret Service didn't have automobiles in Knoxville at the time, but anyway, a Secret Service agent came from Louisville, Kentucky down to Knoxville to pick him up and take him to Washington, D.C. and to meet the president. Well, I got very interested, in the 8th of August, and I came down here a few years ago to the celebration in Greenville, and which was where, my father was born. And then I wasn't able to make it this year because I didn't know that they were having it. But I, had planned to come to this one. And then after I got here, I found out about another celebration in Parrotsville, which I attended yesterday. So hopefully going forward, I'll be able to keep up with the dates of all of them and, be able to, attend. Okay, well, August 8th is significant to me because of the history, because of my family connection, because my great-great-grandfather founded it, and it's been, and I'm kind of like Bill here, it's an elusive type of thing, and they have it this place, but they don't have it that place, and then they have it another place, and it's just always, it's kind of amazing how it skips different places. And I remember this gentleman I used to work with when I was about, 18, 19 years old. He was from Paris, Tennessee, and he would always take off and go home for the 8th of August. And so I knew what 8th of August kind of was, but I didn't know all this. And see, where I live at, we don't celebrate it, but about 60 miles north of there, in a place named Eminence, Kentucky, they do celebrate it. And it's just, I think it's 19 or so different cities that it's celebrated in. Hopkinsville's one, Paris, Tennessee's one, and and I forget the name of the city up in eastern Kentucky, where it's celebrated, but maybe it'll catch on and be celebrated more places. I think it's a great idea, and to marry it up with the 40th anniversary of the Beck Cultural Center, that's just excellent. And hopefully they'll be intertwined, for all time to come. And it promotes both events. And of course, Beck will go on, and hopefully the 8th of August will go on and spread. And younger people will understand and know about what it means. Because I really didn't know anything about most of this when I was a little kid growing up. I would tell kids about my great-great-grandfather. I'd tell kids about slavery, because young kids really don't have any idea about a whole lot of stuff that went on to get to where we are today. And therefore, they have little appreciation for the suffering and sacrifices that a lot of people made for things to be like they are now. So I think I could probably tell them quite a bit.
All right. Very significant story. I think we can get everyone to unmute so we can talk with each other. I'd like to start with William. That was your work. So tell me, how did you catch up with Mr. Arter? How were you able to find this gem?
Yeah, Ned actually started coming around the emancipation celebrations after that cane that he was holding was actually the cane that was given to his, great uncle William Johnson, who was an ex-slave, by President Roosevelt. It's a silver-headed cane. And he started coming to the 8th of August celebrations in Newport and Greenville and Knoxville. And so he was easy to find. You just had to be at the celebration. And so that's how I came to be acquainted with him.
Awesome. And then I need to ask everyone if you could just give us a brief, how did you know about Emancipation Saturday? Let's start with Dr. Fain. Has this been a tradition you were familiar with?
No, not growing up. I was first exposed to it when I started doing dissertation research on Huntington, and traveled throughout the region to talk to various community members throughout the region. And I ended up learning about it most profoundly in Gallipolis, Ohio, where I interviewed some local citizens. And they informed me about, by the way, Gallipolis is about a 35-minute drive from Huntington up the Ohio River. And I ran into some locals, and they informed me of this celebration. And I think is affiliated, I think it grew out of the AMM, John G. African Methodist Episcopal Church, which might be the oldest church, AME church west of the Ohio. I won't swear about that, but it was established around 1818. And so in any event, It was news to me. It had been a tradition for quite many years by the time I got there, of course. I could never, unfortunately, my obligations at that time and responsibilities of trying to do the dissertation research, trying to meet the dictates of my fellowship, I could never go back and attend any of the celebrations. And to this day, I regret not being able to go back, because one of the reasons is, and what we find out as Black people do research on the slave era and the history, so many of these folks are passing on, and so we're losing bits and pieces and narratives and stories that the likelihood of recapturing them is greatly diminished. And what I really appreciate about going to Gallipolis was this kind of, many of the people had discovered like a fountain of youth there. Their memories, their recollections, their lucidity was just amazing. I mean, I met 90-year-old people who were still driving. And, that's not common to me. And so I think, it's important to recognize that that when folks go out and talk to elders, have these conversations, we learn things and we continue to revitalize them and move them forward.
That is awesome. And how about you, Jasmine? When did you learn about Emancipation Saturday?
I did not learn about Emancipation Saturday until about 5 years ago. And I could not for the life of me figure out why Tennessee was celebrating Juneteenth in August. It did not make sense to me. I've always known it to be celebrated in June until I was invited to Emancipation Saturday event here in Johnson City. And Toria Hale and Melissa Morrison in Johnson City put together an event. And it was a small event, and I had to go back because I made a little snarky comment, like, why are they celebrating Juneteenth in August? And I had to be corrected and educated about the history of Emancipation Saturday in Tennessee. And so I think that's just a direct result of us not talking about our stories enough, us not celebrating our stories enough. I'm not surprised that Mr. Ned Arter had no idea his relationship to his great-great-great-grandfather and his great-great-great-grandfather's contribution to Emancipation Saturday, because we have to be very intentional with finding out our history and our story. It doesn't come by default like others. So I'm not surprised at all. I mean, it takes incidents like running into scholars like you all or events like this to kind of educate people. It doesn't just happen. So luckily I came to Johnson City and was invited to this Emancipation Saturday event and really got the history and the relationship of Greenville, Tennessee to the event. So my job now is to continue to spread that knowledge and, create events and things that continue to celebrate it. So the people behind me who also don't know can figure it out as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
How about you, William? Did you grow up knowing about Emancipation Saturday?
I grew up going to we just called it the block parties in Greenville or every other year in Newport. So we just thought it was a time to like go see girls and like kick it. We didn't know that it was what the meaning of it was. We just knew that it was the block parties. And then after I got out of college and I started looking more, and there was a group in East Tennessee called AHA once upon a time, the African American Heritage Association of East Tennessee. And I think they're pretty much gone now, but they used to put on educational events in Greenville and in Knoxville, little panels and stuff that talked about that history. And that's where I really learned about these celebrations that we just went to. We didn't know what the meaning was. And I think a lot of this, the history with our folks and our families isn't passed down because it's painful. Like, I know my dad had said, like, his parents would be like, well, why do you want to talk about that? Like,
wow,
just like move on. And so I think we lose a lot of our stuff because some of the stories are painful for people to recount, and they got work to do, so they don't sit and dwell on some of these stories.
Well, unfortunately, though, that's how we get written out, because certainly as a child, I mean, my great-grandfather, we celebrated beginning with the marriage of my great-grandmother and great-grandfather, who took the opportunity of emancipation to get married. Even though they were a family, they officially got married. So here in Powell County, Kentucky, we celebrated, this will be our 154th year to celebrate it. But like most people, we had no idea. We just saw second Saturday in August. I really didn't understand the importance of it until about 5 years ago, when we tried to change the date to Labor Day weekend, and the old elders in our family were about, like, no, you can't, they really took the canes out and tried to beat us down. But it's like, so we had to stick with the second Saturday. But that made me want to know why that date. And so that's really when I started to investigate. So you're right, Jasmine, just not knowing, just stumbling into our history accidentally, really, that's not good. So my other question, you mentioned, Dr. Fain, we'll have to talk once this is over, because you're now into my dissertation when you're talking about John G. Fee and Gallipolis and AME Church, because he's out of Northern Kentucky, Fee.
Okay.
And
yes.
He's an African-American who was emancipated in Kentucky and ended up in Gallipolis, where he started the church. So so there's a direct Underground Railroad escape route connection from Kentucky to Gallipolis. So this will be a wonderful conversation we can continue.
Sure.
Any other thoughts on what you heard from Ned Arter and his willingness to travel? Does he spend the entire week of August traveling, or how does he manage to cover all these events?
He's I don't know how he does it, but he told the story that back in the day, to drive from, I guess he lives in around Indianapolis, and to drive down through Kentucky back in the day before the advent of the interstate, they would have to drive down Highway 25, and it was 12 hours in a car or 12 hours on a train. And so I think he's kind of used to that. Like, people come home, and I think people travel to get home. And I don't know how he does it. You'll leave a place and go someplace else, and he's there too. It's like magic. I think it's that pain. I don't know, but he definitely makes it a point to attend every 8th of August or Emancipation Day event in the region that he can, and he's there.
I am so glad that you got him on tape now, and that we know this beginning history, because I think it's going to inspire quite a few other people. Anything else we want to comment? We want to move on to our next clip. We've got 3 we want to share. Okay. And I would say when we share our next clip, be sure to mute yourselves. But this next clip, I think, is important because of how this story is interpreted. The Andrew Johnson home in Greenville is a National Historic Site. I don't know how many people have actually ever visited the site, but this is how the story of Johnson and Emancipation Saturday is shared with the general public when they do attend Andrew Johnson's home in Greenville. So if we'll listen to our next clip, and then we'll come back and discuss it.
Andrew Johnson accompanied a friend to Parrottsville, which in those days was a crossroads of sorts for the Drover Trail, for livestock and whatnot going to market in Asheville. There, he bought Dolly, who was a 14-year-old girl who, again, based on William, asked Andrew Johnson to buy her. He said because she liked his face, basically, but perhaps Dolly knew that he was a politician. Perhaps he knew that Johnson was from East Tennessee, a smaller area as far as slaveholders went, probably a better chance at having housework instead of field work. And somewhere along the line, she convinced him to return and buy her half-brother, Sam. And he did. And this also gave Sam a much better existence than he may have had somewhere else. Whether it was a status symbol of reaching a certain mark in life, there have also been speculations that it was almost, as Dolly suspected, a mercy buying to keep them from a worser fate somewhere else. Andrew Johnson held nearly every political office that you can hold on the way to the presidency, from alderman, mayor, state representative and senator, U.S. representative and senator, governor of Tennessee. And through it all, you see slavery mentioned in speeches. You see evolving ideas about slavery until later on in his career, you see a gradual emancipationist starting to form. He was concerned about the reaction to the way these people would be treated with immediate emancipation, the way they could be worked into society. And by the time he was military governor of Tennessee, reestablishing Union control of the state during the Civil War, he freed not only his slaves, August 8, 1863, but all the rest of the slaves in the state in October of the following year. The Emancipation Proclamation had not covered Tennessee because it was no longer a state in rebellion at that point. Andrew Johnson, in many ways, is a dichotomy. He was a Southerner, but he was a staunch defender of the Union. He was a defender of the Constitution. He believed in the federal government, limited federal government, but he also believed that many elements should be left to the individual states. He was a slave owner, and yet when the time came, he said that slavery is a cancer upon the body politic, and it must be cut out. And he realized that one of the most critical means of preserving the Union was for slavery to be abolished. As military governor of Tennessee during the Civil War, he freed his own slaves August 8th, 1863, and the remainder of the slaves in the state the following year in October of 1864. August 8th, 1863. The two sources that we have for that date come from Will, one of Andrew Johnson's former slaves, Dolly's son. The family was living in Nashville at that time. Andrew Johnson is military governor. Eliza and the children had made their way to join them. Judge Patterson, Andrew Johnson's son-in-law, had eventually arrived, helping some of Johnson's slaves. William says in one account that Eliza called them all in and told them that they were now free. In another account, he says that Andrew Johnson told them of Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and that they were all free now if they wished to go, and he said we all stayed. Albeit that there is no absolute documentation that we know of for that day. Being the day that he freed his slaves, he did later attend an August 8th celebration in Greenville with his former slave Sam, who was serving as officer of the day at Tusculum, and Johnson gave speeches there. So that's an authentication, if you will, of him approving of that date. So August 8th, 1863, that is a relatively early date for emancipation of slaves, as far as Andrew Johnson is concerned. By September of that same year, the New York Times says that Governor Johnson plants himself on extreme anti-slavery ground.
All right. So, how many people studied Andrew Johnson in high school or college as a president? He's not a
Very
president.
little, yeah.
Yeah, he's not a president that gets a great deal of mention. So, were any of you, either of you, aware of his impact on African American freedom in Tennessee before Williams' work?
No, I wasn't, and you know, this is one thing I really appreciate about this forum is that I get to learn about, I get to deepen my knowledge about Tennessee, about Black Appalachia, that section of Black Appalachia. So I really appreciate it. You know, he's a complicated man for sure. You know, I would take some. I'd be interested to know. You know, the commentator talked about, you know, him purchasing the stepbrother. You know, perhaps as a moral imperative. And I will, you know, I would be interested to counter and say perhaps that was also an economic imperative as well, presumably that person is young and has some many years of potential labor to provide for Johnson and the family. So, but it, you know, this is all great to be enriched, to gain some knowledge, and to see the connections between and disparities and between what happens up in my neck of the woods, which is the tri-state region of southeast Ohio, eastern Kentucky, and southwest Virginia and West Virginia, because there are some real commonalities, but there are also some distinct differences between these circumstances.
Correct. And so where is Parrottsville, William? Does anyone, is that close to the North Carolina border?
Parrottsville is in Cocke County, which borders North Carolina. And so Parrottsville is in between Newport, Tennessee and Greenville, Tennessee.
I got
It's a rural farming community. And there's a African-American church there and an old Rosenwald school that has been converted basically into the Black Church's Fellowship Hall now, but it's preserved. And so Parrottsville, Tennessee is, I guess at one point was the slave market.
Wow. And so, and we speak of Johnson, if you study what's happening in the country today, and you study Andrew Johnson's views, he pretty much was laying out white nationalist agenda in post-Civil War Tennessee. So I'm struck by the number of African Americans we showed you earlier, 14 legislators who came out of Tennessee. No, Kentucky did not have Black elected officials. West Virginia did not have Black elected officials. I think the closest in the region would have been North Carolina, who had 9 elected officials. Still, Tennessee seemed to be very, very progressive at the end of the Civil War. So do either of you have any idea as to what happened? I think Johnson had a big part in changing that. That's my take on it, but I would like to hear what each of you think.
So
Jasmine,
as I was, you know, kind of learning up on this, I mean, obviously who stood out to me is Samuel Johnson, right? I think that he was, of course, a personal slave, and from what I understood, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they were pretty close. And like, I feel like Samuel doesn't get enough credit for maybe persuading Andrew Johnson that Black people are people, right? And not to say that Andrew Johnson looked at Samuel as an equal, but I definitely think that their relationship had some kind of influence on his relationship with African Americans in Tennessee. It sounded like Samuel was an excellent leader, someone who could call Andrew Johnson and ask for land, and Andrew Johnson say, "Here you are." And so I don't think Samuel is getting enough credit in this of being maybe the person who kind of clicked the switch for Mr. Johnson. Their families were very connected for a long time, even after Emancipation Saturday. So, like I said, I'm a story person, and reading up on this, I just could not help but to be very intrigued by Samuel and his influence on Andrew Johnson's decisions.
Do you think Andrew Johnson, and this is something we don't talk about when we talk about presidents. Number one, Andrew Johnson was a poor man himself. He had been indentured himself. He was a laborer. He had been ridiculed. He might have felt some form of kinship with anyone who was a laborer, which would have, of course, included Samuel. But then I think as he goes on, as he becomes more politically involved, you see him separate from this common man thread. And I don't know how much he's being influenced by those who cannot accept Blackness as part of the political landscape. But what do you think, William, on Johnson and his influence?
I think that Johnson is a perfect illustration of kind of how all of our history kind of exists and operates within these vast contradictions. Like, I think that the kind of friction that occurs within these contradictions, we had a lot of early Black politicians right after the Civil War, but also we were the home of the Ku Klux Klan and Nathan Bedford Forrest.
Right.
I think Parson Brownlow, being the governor of Tennessee at the time, was also like staunchly anti-democratic party and mobilized the Tennessee militia against the Klan. But then also Parson Brownlow was not necessarily a friend to the Black person. Like he clearly was trying to use Black people's votes to remain in power. So I think like these contradictions, and even with Andrew Johnson, he did some of these things that you can look at and, you know, think that maybe he was a friend of the Black man, the working Black man, but also he was responsible for the dismantling of Reconstruction and the removal of all these Black politicians from South Carolina and Tennessee, and the murder of some of them, actually.
Right.
And so, and I want to kind of go back to what Dr. Fain said, like, we got to remember, like, he was a slave owner who utilized human bodies for his own political and economic gain. But when it became politically inconvenient and he wanted to get in good steads with Abraham Lincoln, then he freed his own slaves and then took these steps. So I think embracing all these contradictions that are within our stories is where the good stuff is at.
Yeah.
Right. Definitely, if you read his later writings, he is definitely not positioning himself as a friend to the Black man. He definitely does not believe in shared anything.
Yeah.
He is definitely pushing for the working class white environment separate from Blacks and not seeing them as equal and really just dismissing them totally. But
would you mind if I
go ahead, please, Dr. Fain.
No, I'm you know, not being really that well versed on Tennessee and history. It occurred to me though that a number of the Black representatives were from Shelby County, and that's Memphis, isn't it?
Yes.
Is that part of, could that be part of the fact that you've got a significant Black population there during this era, who presumably have economic clout, that they can maybe, and a critical mass sufficient to translate that into political clout? Is that also an interesting story?
It is, because Memphis was also the home of Nathan Bedford Forrest. And Nathan Bedford Forrest was a huge impact on Andrew Johnson. So for a long time, he's one of the wealthiest slave traders. He had, Nathan Bedford Forrest had slave pens in Western Kentucky, all the way down the river from Memphis to Natchez. So he's an extremely wealthy man and very politically influential. And I'm sure he had an influence on the politics of Tennessee, not just Shelby County, but the state in general.
And that leads me to, you know, the fact that you can make, with Memphis and the critical mass, you can make some inroads at the municipal level and maybe even at the state level, but eventually the power brokers are going to increasingly develop mechanisms and constraints to slowly but surely diminish that power. And I think that seems to go hand in hand with Reconstruction. You know, while Reconstruction is impacting the state and the region writ large, at the local level, I think white politicians are also engineering ways to increasingly restrict and constrain Black political agitation and aspiration as well.
Well, I want us to move on to our next clip, but I definitely think moving forward for scholars, looking more at the work of Johnson, especially in a comparison of what we see happening in the country today, might be a worthy scholarly project. So our last clip is from Geraldine Taylor. This is again William's work and interview, and I'd like for us to hear her shared history of her understanding of emancipation, and then we'll come back and discuss it.
My name is Geraldine Taylor. I guess I went to the park, when I was about 12 years old. Every year, my parents would plan for us to go to the Chilhowee Park with a picnic lunch with fried chicken, bologna sandwiches, and potato salad that was not on ice. And it sat out all day long, and we ate it. Nothing happened to us. And then we would go and ride on the rides. But my parents or nobody really explained to us the meaning of 8th of August. We just knew it was a day of celebration. And that's how we celebrated. But they never actually mentioned why we're celebrating it. They just always said that it was the 8th of August. I suppose I was about... I guess after I got in college, my first year in college, that long, maybe in high school, I guess they talked about it in high school. So I'd say in high school, I learned that 8th of August and the meaning of it. The 8th of August meant to me that there was a struggle, and that in the struggle, my people made progress. They made some progress, and I did have a sense of pride knowing that. And I always thought about other ways that we could kind of make that kind of a struggle and even have more equal rights. Well, I think the reason it's important for us to continue is because our young people don't know, just like I did when I was a kid, the importance of this, but they must realize that there is a struggle going on, and it will continue to go on even when I'm gone and their parents are gone. It will continue to go on, but they need to know that there are things that they need to learn when they're in school, and they need to focus on making contributions, outstanding contributions, not only to their race, but to their community and to society, period. I think that that's one of the main reasons that we should teach our children the struggle and the reason that they've come through what our people have come through. Now, my father was a barber, had the first black business on Central, barbering business on Central, and he was not an educated man. He went to 8th grade, and there was 5 of us, and he wanted us to be educated. And he talked a little bit about that. As a matter of fact, he said that the reason he's a barber is because he did not want to take the injustices that were rendered to him when he worked in a big industry, because they were very cruel to him. And so he went to barbering school so that he could escape that. So he said that he wanted all of us to go to college so that we would be prepared for the injustices that occur in our society. As far as I know, there were no organization, no teachers, no one explained to us why we were actually celebrating 8th of August. It was just a time for the families to get together and to get to have as many rides as we could on the 8th of August at the park, and it was just anticipation, and they would threaten us, if you don't do this, you won't get to go to the park. They would make those threats to us, and of course, that helped to kind of modify our behavior. But nobody really explained to us. My parents didn't, and we had a music teacher that talked about that an awful lot in high school. Her name was Annetta Wallace, but she would sing songs and explain to us the meaning of those songs that oftentimes would reflect the struggle that we were having. And but I really don't never heard anybody actually just detail the 8th of August celebration. I never heard that. Everybody in every community would celebrate that day. The anticipation, like you said, was just there. You talked about it. It was almost like Christmas. For us, we didn't have anything else to do. We had a playground that we would go to every day. And it was sort of like Christmas. 2 more days and we'll be ready to go to the park. Oh, I can't wait. And everybody in the community had that same kind of excitement about coming. No one did any shopping to come as far as clothes to wear, but our parents, I'm sure, did a lot of shopping about planning that lunch because, we couldn't go into any establishment to eat at that time. So they had to have enough food to feed all the people in the family from the picnic basket. And my mother would shop for that. Yes, sometimes we were lucky enough to get here early enough to get a table. And if we got a table, they would put a tablecloth on there. And my cousin's, Mark's mother, and my father, like I said, were brothers and sisters, so the cousins would all be together. And they would put the food on the table. And they'd give us our money to go buy tickets to ride. And then they'd tell us to be back at a certain time for lunch. And then we got back to the picnic table at that time to eat lunch. We'd gobble the food down real quickly and back out we went to ride the rides.
All right. So this is, I have to say, another tradition being kept alive with those hats and that.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
this
indeed.
was, and I'd asked him this before, was this after church?
Yeah.
Yes. When was this interview done?
They knew that they were going to be interviewed about the 8th of August, and so they came to the park.
They're wearing their Sunday dress, the Sunday best. Yes.
It wasn't going to be no jank. They were
there you go.
Yes.
There you go. All those traditions about how you're supposed to look when you're in public. So
that was fantastic.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I would say if you look at the actual website with all the full length of these clips, all the ladies you interviewed came dressed. They all had hats. They all had their Sunday go to meeting vest on. And I really appreciate that because that's another tradition we could actually even talk about.
Yeah.
So what part, William, are they speaking of where they were not permitted to go except this one day?
It's Chilhowie Park in Knoxville, in East Knoxville. So at that time, Chilhowie Park was almost like an amusement park. They had like a Ferris wheel and all kinds of rides. And so the 8th of August was the only day that Black residents were able to go to the park. And it's not that it wasn't that unique because, I mean, in Newport, Tennessee, that was the day that Black folks were allowed to go to the city park and swim in the city pool. Was the 8th of August. So that was the one day. And then they would drain and clean the pool the next day. The interesting thing is Greenville, Tennessee was kind of self-contained. The community in Greenville, Wesley Heights, they had their own swimming pool. They had their own park. They had their own spaces. And so they really didn't have to engage with the segregated world to celebrate. And they would parade downtown. That would be the moment where they engaged with the broader community. But a lot of the celebrations could be up on Wesley Heights, and which I thought was really
so Greenville had its own. Do those places still exist?
The pool's gone. the pool is gone, but the infrastructure is still there. The park and the school, and there's five or six churches up in Greenville, up on the hill, and so they still kick it. They still have their block parties and the stuff in the day for the kids, but the swimming pool's gone.
I think it's important to mention here too that one of the reasons I think these things were created was, again, to go back to Jasmine's hero, Samuel Johnson, who immediately, when he had an opportunity to purchase land for schools, for Black-owned businesses and areas, he did so. And it seems as though he spread that mindset to other African Americans. So we see now the benefit of that African Americans were independent of relying on a segregated system like Knoxville or Newport. So what about this idea in other areas? Here it's been referred to in Kentucky as Second Saturday, or have there been other names that you know the emancipation celebrations to be called?
I don't. Yeah. I will say, go ahead, William.
No. I just know it is the 8th of August.
I think one of the really interesting things to me about her commentary, besides the fact that she reminds me of my dear 95-year-old grandmother, who still wears high heels and wears her hats when she goes to church. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Good for her.
That's the way you do it.
Yes. Love my nanny. But it's to me, she made allusion to it about the political aspect of the Emancipation Day celebration. And that to me is what I want to, if I might, talk a little bit more about Huntington and the uniqueness of the tri-state area in which Huntington resides. Because there was also not only Huntington, which is growing exponentially throughout the late 19th or early 20th century, and it's because of its the growth of industry affiliated with the railroad and manufacturing, and so the influx of Black migrants into Huntington from Virginia, but as well as drawing from Ashland, Kentucky, which is just down the road, as well as Ironton, Ohio, which is just down the road. So you've got this critical mass of Black folks within this region, which in large measure are still constrained, not so much, of course, in Ohio and Ashland, but constrained significantly by what we call benevolent segregation in West Virginia. But because of the fact you've got these discrete but unified Black communities, they are coming together and en masse celebrating Emancipation Day by the early 20th century. And what they're doing is they're coming to Huntington and they are claiming their right, asserting their right to use, historically white space, the public arena, to celebrate. They have, at one point, they have so many people, they have 5,000 people in the 1902 celebration. Now, this might be a little bit of an exaggeration by the newspaper, but the newspaper recounts 5,000 people showing up at Cliffside Park. And the reason why Cliffside is important is because in Huntington, there was Ritter Park. There is Ritter Park, which was designated as a white-only park. And so Blacks then, in conjunction with the establishment of Ritter Park, they established Cliffside Park, which is in Ashland, Kentucky. And that then becomes their space. And there is a tram, I wouldn't say line that travels from Huntington to Ashland to Ironton. And so Blacks are able to ride on this and congregate, celebrate, and also assert that, their history, their culture, and their political aspirations by claiming to some degree that space. Affiliated with that is that 7 years later, in 1909, Blacks from Charleston, which is a 45-mile up the road from Huntington, which is still, Charleston has the largest Black population of any city in West Virginia at that time. Huntington is second. But they Black Charlestonians come down to Huntington and bring a 15-piece band in which they parade through downtown Huntington to celebrate and commemorate Emancipation Day. So, you know, this is unquestionably, this is a seminal event for many people. But and I also want to shift the lens a little bit as well. You know, we've got this vast area between Eastern Tennessee and, you know, Huntington. This vast area of coal fields and coal mines,
Right.
and Black residential populations. You know, I don't, in my research, and I just finished a 328-page memoir by our friend, Alistair, I want to, you know, in which he recounts his life and his experiences in growing up in the Eastern Kentucky coal fields. Nowhere does he mention any type of celebration like or recognition. And I think, you know, it's really important to understand that perhaps people, you know, and they're working. They are celebrating their community and their religious aspects in that regard. But I don't get a sense that they are either, number one, recognizing and or celebrating Emancipation Day or, you know, Juneteenth.
Wow. Well, certainly here in Kentucky, there's a lot going on in Eastern Kentucky when coal mining strikes happen and people are being driven, African Americans are being used as strike breakers, and they're being driven from Eastern Kentucky and they're going west. Yeah. They're going on the river. So here in Kentucky, probably the longest running Emancipation Day celebrations are in Western Kentucky, not Eastern Kentucky. So yeah, if you are traveling from Paducah down through Hopkinsville, down through all the other counties along the river, celebrations, in fact, this would have been the week-long celebration with thousands of people coming from all over the country, as many as 20,000 people.
Wow.
Showed in Western Kentucky. It is a huge week-long celebration with each city taking a turn. But I'm willing to bet if you were to do some oral history interviews of where these families originated and ended up in Western Kentucky, there's probably an Appalachian connection there.
Sure. And I will say, No, go ahead.
No, beginning in the 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, when people are beginning to move out of Appalachia to find jobs, right? I'm thinking they're taking their celebration with them.
Sure. I was, in conjunction with that, it's important to remember that the coal mine, these were controlled by companies.
Right.
Who designated policies. And in large measure, any cultural observation, religious observation, well, I'm going to say cultural, that in any way upset the status quo was I would say outlawed. Right. And especially, you know, the companies are controlling the store towns, they're building the churches, they're building the schools. They don't want any type of observation like that that cause attention to Black cultural observances, that upsets whites, the white workers and the white residents of those particular coal towns.
I did grow up in a company town in Hazard. The Blue Diamond Coal Company owned everything. Yeah. The school, the store, the housing, the permission for you to have a holiday. So I do exactly understand what you're saying. Yeah. So, and it would not take very long, I think, for people to forget about the holiday. Yeah. And maybe replace it with something in that it's more acceptable to the company.
Yes.
That is a very real thing and wonderful information to have. Jasmine, you're from Hampton?
Hampton, Virginia. Yes, ma'am.
Did they celebrate in Hampton? Not at all?
Not Emancipation Saturday. We definitely knew about Juneteenth, but I can't even truly say that even that was celebrated, to be honest.
Yeah.
I will say that we had wash night service. I grew up in a Black Baptist church, so Queen Street Baptist. We had wash night service. And similar to the people being interviewed today and the clips, I didn't know why we were going to church. We just knew that on New Year's Eve we went to church, and to later find out that is even in connection to the end of slavery. Slaves stood up, or stayed up December 31st, 1862, because Abraham Lincoln was signing the final copy of the Emancipation Proclamation on the 1st. So it was a tradition to get together. Well, and back then they got together and they celebrated that, and they waited up all night. And so that kind of turned into a wash night service that I thought was just to hear people testify about their year and eat good breakfast. So,
that's what it turned into, Jasmine.
Right.
Because people didn't understand what they were watching for.
Exactly. And can you imagine how many of those situations that we as African Americans have? To this day, we do these things and we don't know why. So I'm really grateful for Storytelling Center and you all and your work for making those stories come alive and giving some kind of definition to, these practices that we have. Because, of course, you all know, you're right, you're intentional in your research, but for those everyday folks who, maybe they're not passionate about it, but it's still necessary that they know. Events like this can kind of create that definition to these events, and we have to figure out ways to keep, like I said, everyday folks aware of what we're doing, our contributions, our stories. And I was telling someone, I grew up in Hampton, Virginia. One of my favorite movies, Hidden Figures, right? Based in Hampton, Virginia.
Yeah.
Right? I had no idea.
Sure.
Had no idea. You hear about NASA going to the moon and going to space, but you don't hear about the Katherine Johnsons and the Dorothy Vaughns who were directly, contributing to that thing, and it was in my hometown. So that's why it's important for us to know. It gives us definition, gives these situations definition, and so we're not just celebrating, right? We have a reason to celebrate. We know why we're celebrating, why we're doing what we're doing.
Well said.
Yeah. It is wonderful that somehow we have managed to keep the traditions alive long enough for the information to catch up, right? For us to be able to say, this is why we are doing these things. And I was like you, watch night was a ritual. My family still does it. And you're right. It was all about thanking how you got over, which I'm sure was part of the emancipation event too, but mainly it was to make sure Lincoln signed that proclamation, because if he had not signed it, Black evangelicals already had a plan for what was going to happen next if he were to renege on signing the proclamation. We don't talk about that either, because if you talk about radical Blacks, they were going to arm themselves to enforce the proclamation. So the Civil War was going to start either way.
Wow.
And I do know there are churches who still celebrate emancipation January 1st in certain communities. That's a date that people use. We had mentioned September 22nd as the day people celebrate, because that's when it was written. So we have all these variables in here for emancipation. William, I was trying to save this to the last, but I can't. And I didn't know if I was going to bring it up, but I'm going to jump right in. When we were talking about Johnson and Dolly, can we bring up the fact that Dolly claims all of her children were by William's son, Samuel Johnson's son, Robert?
Yeah, we can certainly talk about that. Yeah, I think it's assumed even by both sides of the family that was the case. That I guess it would have been William Johnson was one of Andrew Johnson's son. That's right. Andrew Johnson's son had children by
Dolly.
Yeah. And so it would be Andrew Johnson's grandchildren.
Right. His grandchildren are mixed race. So his lineal behavior towards Samuel Johnson may have had to do with the fact that his grandkids were also Black. And Dolly never married, correct? I don't think she ever married. So she had 3 children, two girls and a boy, William. So, you know, how would this have gone over post-presidential politics? I think William, yeah.
Ooh. Yeah, that's a non-starter.
But even that story, if I had not seen your documentary, William, I would not have known. That's not anything I've ever heard mentioned. We've talked about Thomas Jefferson, of course, and Sally Heming, but here we also have Andrew Johnson. And I with DNA now, I'm sure we could probably.
Hello.
I don't think that it was unique. I don't think it was unique at all. There were 1,500, over 1,500 enslaved people in Greene County in 1860. I mean, this is not a unique story that your body belonged to another person. And that everything associated with your body belonged to this slaveholder.
Sure.
But William goes on to have a fairly, Greenville, we are talking about ownership of park, ownership of land, having all these assets. And so I'm just wondering if some of that could have been that Johnson is really rewarding his family. This is his family. So we can think about it that way too.
Sure.
And how you know, Eastern Kentucky has one of our public discussions, we're going to talk about mixed race in Appalachia, which is probably more prevalent in Central Appalachia than it is anywhere else in the country from the very beginning. You wouldn't believe that now, but that is the history of the region.
There's an interesting book, and the title's going to sound one way, but it's not that kind of a book. It's called Afro Yankees and Black Confederates. It's not what you think. It's actually a really good book. But they talk about the surprise of the Union troops that come through Southwest Virginia when they saw the slave auction blocks, and there were slaves being sold with blonde hair and blue eyes, kind of blonde curly hair and blue eyes.
Wow.
And how obviously the slave owners were selling their own children and grandchildren up and down the river. So.
Wow.
That makes the big slave. We'll talk a little bit about that on September 5th, that slave market and the mixed race children that are really worth quite a bit of money. They are, in today's equivalency would be roughly $30,000-$40,000 for one of these mixed race children who are kind of seen as a oddity, a collector's item. So I want to encourage our viewers, now is the time for you to join in the conversation. If you want to, go ahead and text your message to the Facebook page, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. There's a question about Tennessee. Does Tennessee have any African-American communities that began during Reconstruction? I think they were here way before Reconstruction, wouldn't you say?
There was a historically Black community in East Tennessee called Hoop Creek in Claiborne County, Tennessee, right on the border of Claiborne County and Hancock County, Tennessee. And everybody's pretty much dead and gone now. But that was a community that was, people either pulled their money and bought land and had farming communities, or were given land by their old ex-slave holder in this region anyway. And so that was one community. There's tons up your way though, Cicero, up in the tri-state area, right?
I'm sorry?
There was several of those communities up that way, right?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, all along the railroad lines, you know, Black communities. Keystone would be one. Beckley, you know, Bluefield. Those are the bigger ones. Hinton. I mean, yeah. As soon as you crossed over into West Virginia, you had that just dots of small Black communities, villages, even. You know, And that's one of the shame, one of the sad developments of today's, I guess, or economics situation is that, folks had to leave. They had to get jobs disappeared and dried up, and folks had to relocate. And those towns have many of them have really fallen on hard times.
Well, we certainly know that in eastern Kentucky, we have these little alcoves hidden away. It's still difficult to get to them today. So one of the benefits, I think, for African Americans in the mountain are there are places in eastern Kentucky now along the Appalachian Trail. You still, unless somebody guides you in, you can get in and may never be able to get out. So for African Americans, that we know that beginning in the late 1790s, as people are pushing west, a lot of these little, what's now been called Melungeon communities existed in the mountains. And again, going back to DNA, you've seen the latest that says that was primarily African-American and European blood mixes that were living as Melungeons in the mountains. And as long as they could claim another nationality, they were not enslaved. So they were able to pretty much remain independent in the mountains.
Sure.
So again, another shout out for the benefit of being in Eastern Kentucky.
It's getting back to a couple of things, getting back to Jasmine's response on, not knowing about Katherine Johnson and NASA. Well, I did research in White Sulphur Springs, affiliated with the slave circumstance at White Sulphur Springs, which is now the Greenbrier. And no one ever mentioned anything about Katherine Johnson or this illustrious family. And also about this whole thing of the mixed race children. One of the things I was going to do in my book that I didn't get around to was actually examine the number of mulatto children and compare it within Greenbrier County versus, I think the adjacent county in Virginia was Augusta County. And I was going to try to figure out some way to document, if at all possible, statistically, the number of mulatto children produced at a certain point within a certain chronological era with White Sulphur Springs, which utilized they hired free blacks as well as slaves in the region. But if you don't know, White Sulphur Springs was the summer retreat for rich white Southerners in the antebellum era. And so unquestionably, there was a residential population, a long-term staff there, as well as new staff coming through, that if you had the wherewithal or the desire to, as a white man staying there, you could probably impose your will, or maybe even entice through monetary or other methods, relationships, consensual and or coerced,
right,
with the resident black working population at White Sulphur Springs.
There's a question from one of our viewers who says, should white people participate in Emancipation Day celebrations, or should it just be reserved for black people?
Well, if you've ever been to an emancipation celebration in Greenville or a Moja celebration in Johnson City or Newport or Knoxville, it's already too late. The white folks they already got in. So it's not a homogeneous celebration. I think that it's already, the cat's out of the bag.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Jasmine,
I was gonna say, we as a country, right? This isn't, it's a black issue for sure, but
Sure.
Why not? We celebrate things that we probably shouldn't be celebrating. We won't go there, but this is something we actually got right as a country, right? So absolutely, this is not just a celebration for Black people. This is something that we did as a country, and we're still working it out. I'm not saying we're perfect, but I mean, like, if we're going to celebrate all this other stuff, why not celebrate as a whole country something that we actually got right?
I agree.
Go ahead, Dr. Fain.
No, I agree. I don't think there's any reason to exclude. This is an important recognition that whites have been, can be, and hopefully will be in the future allies in the quest for recognition for equal justice, social justice, equal rights, economic opportunities, so forth and so on.
Well, and if you look at the early records of the Emancipation Celebration, they were mixed race events. You know, Johnson brought people, African Americans from all over. So it was, I think, when it began. So William, yeah, the cat is definitely out of the bag. Folks have been.
Well, I would say in talking to some elders, during the height of Jim Crow segregation, it was not kumbaya. It wasn't people. It wasn't a multiracial
event.
Love fest. It was during the height of Jim Crow. It was in lots of places a predominantly Black event. There was very few white people. I had heard though that white people would come to the dances that were held at the tobacco warehouses in Greenville so that they could learn the new dances. And so that was something that I was told by them.
Okay.
Always helping.
They can come to my house. I'll teach them.
So we've got about 10 minutes. I want to get your take on the plan to make Juneteenth the national celebration. How do you think that will impact our emancipation celebrations in Central Appalachia? Jasmine, you said that you've already had a blended event where it's Juneteenth in August. How should we be thinking of it? Should we keep this tradition alive? Should we just blend in with what's happening for June 19th in Texas? What's everybody's take on that?
I don't know. I think every community deserves to do what they want to do. I think it's important. I mean, it's one holiday for the nation as a celebration, but I do think there are real compelling reasons for those communities that have always observed it to continue to re-engage it and re-energize it. Because we talked about earlier about the younger people, and I think it's one thing, it's part of it's local peoples, local communities. These are the folks that need to be engaged. And so any way that you can bring that home, it's not just some kind of abstract, we're going to go, no, this is our people were part of this process. This community was part of this process. And I think that's important to continue to pass down through the generations.
William, what are you thinking?
I think that I think there's a couple of things. I'm kind of excited to see like this consolidation of Juneteenth across the country, because it kind of gives us this kind of more national unification of, okay, like this is Emancipation Day. I don't think that you're ever I think Gallup Police is still going to do September 22nd.
Yep. Right.
And I think East Tennessee is still going to do, like Johnson City, like Torrey Hill still going to do Juneteenth on the 8th of August. Like these things are still going to happen locally, but I think that it doesn't have to be either or. And I think particularly it just creates more opportunities for us to talk about why we're celebrating emancipation, why we celebrated emancipation through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, right now the current fight for justice in the streets. Like, we're continuing to celebrate the idea of freedom when like that freedom has never, it's piecemeal. We're always just almost there. Right. Just get just a little bit further, we can see it. but we're still celebrating freedom through, over 150 years, the idea of freedom.
And I think it's important for us to know that even though we talk about the Emancipation Proclamation as though once Lincoln signed it, all slaves were free, but obviously freedom did not roll out smoothly.
No.
Different regions celebrated or were freed at different times, and Texas being the last of the states to free their slaves, and what is a year after the war, they find out they're free. I mean, that in and of itself is a story. But Jasmine, now that you're working with the combined group, how do you think you can take what you now know and add to what's been happening?
So I'm gonna be honest. I'm an event planner, so my antennas are up. But I just can't help but to feel that Greenville, Tennessee deserves this region's attention when it comes to Emancipation Saturday. I think, and not to discredit any other event, but to say that Greenville, Tennessee is the birthplace, right? Is the origin of Emancipation Saturday. I think that it's now our responsibility to get behind Greenville, right? To figure out how to get into Greenville's, and I'm sure they have activities that I don't know about, but hey, I mean, to keep that direct connection and to celebrate it and celebrate Greenville in that manner, I think would be amazing. I'm inspired to get in contact with some Greenville officials and figure out how to make Greenville the mecca of Emancipation Saturday, because why not?
It's there.
Why not?
The elements are there.
Exactly.
And so, and like I said, not to discredit anyone else, but I definitely think that we can get behind Greenville for sure to make this a regional, something recognized regionally. And I'm excited. I have all kind of ideas that I'll keep to myself. But I am really excited and inspired to make that connection, to keep that connection, and to give Greenville their due credit in this.
Right.
That's not a little deal. They
That's
deserve
not a little
this
deal.
title. Right. They deserve
is Samuel Johnson buried in Greenville, William? Where is Samuel Johnson buried?
Lord, you would ask me that. I think so. I think Samuel Johnson. Yeah, I don't want to answer. I'm not sure. I assume.
Okay. So there you go, Jasmine, just to make his location. I mean, we should know where he is, right? And his family. We should know. I know William was in Knoxville or Newport. William Johnson. I thought.
William Johnson was in Knoxville. He's buried at. They're buried at the Freedman Cemetery, and some of Dolly's children are buried at Knoxville College Cemetery.
Oh wow! Okay.
Freedman
but see, that's it. I don't know if Samuel stayed in Greenville, or he said his dad was born there. Ned Arter said so. I think Samuel probably is there in Greenville, but it would be nice for us to know for sure and to really celebrate. If he doesn't have an appropriate monument, maybe this is something that needs to happen. Any closing thoughts? We're close to our time. I want to thank everybody for participating. This is great. I've learned a great deal and I'm excited. I've never been to Greenville. Jasmine, let me know when you're getting ready to pull this off. I definitely want to be there to enjoy that environment. Dr. Fain, tell us what's happening with you.
Well, I mean, again, let me just reiterate, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thanks to the National Storytellers Center. It's good to see William again. It's nice to meet you, Jasmine. And I'm working on, I guess my next book project is expanding the story of a gentleman by the name of Charles Ringo, who was a Buffalo soldier, deserter, and criminal between about his real he made his mark between about 1895 and 1905. He's accused of he deserts. He comes to Huntington. He's from Eastern Kentucky, comes to Huntington around 1895. And I'll give you the quick down and dirty. He's accused of drownings of his 2 stepchildren. He's acquitted of their murder. He then goes out to Kankakee, Illinois, where he's accused of a brutal murder of a prominent white couple, with an axe, by the way. He's acquitted of that murder at the 11th hour when a sheriff from an adjacent county shows up and says that he couldn't have committed the crime because he was in my jail drunk. And he actually ends up in Memphis in 1905 as a restaurant cook. And I'm just giving you the sketching of his remarkable life. And so that's what I'm working on now. Hope to have that perhaps done by next year. And
wonderful. Well,
also one other thing. Sorry, Alistine. We also, I'm a co-editor with Dr. Darren Waters, Dr. Bill Turner, Dr. Wilburn Hayden on a Blacks in Anthology, Volume 2. We are looking for submissions still. You can find the link for the call for papers and the epilogue, which is the Appalachian Studies Association website, as well as a SALA website. Or if anyone is interested, to just send me an email and I'll forward you the information. We hope to have that published. This is through the West Virginia University Press. And if folks don't know, Bill Turner and Ed Cabell were the co-editors of Blacks in Appalachia from 1985, the seminal work on Blacks in Appalachia. We're hoping to follow this up and make this an encyclopedic anthology. And so we would appreciate any and all interest.
Thank you. And believe it or not, we are out of time. So we're beginning our 3rd public discussion on September 5th, talking about slavery in Appalachia. Thank our listeners, thank our panelists for this wonderful, wonderful discussion. We're going to be following Jasmine to Greenville. Everybody's going to be watching you on YouTube and on your website. So thank you for joining us. And I look forward to bringing everyone back on September 5th to talk about slavery in Appalachia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for participating in today's community conversation. For more information on this and other Freedom Stories events, please contact us at the web address or email below. And join us again Saturday, September 5th for the public discussion, Slavery in Appalachia.